Hi, my name is Conrad and I'm with Hope Street Music Studios in Mountain View, California. And today I'm going to show you how to change the strings on a classical guitar, which is really the hardest one to do. I have a recital to play next Saturday, a week from today, and so I want to change the strings to make sure that they're nice and fresh and nice and crisp. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a drop of oil on each tuning machine, right on the gear, so that when I take off the strings, the oil will lubricate the gear and the worm. All you need to do this is a string winder, especially important for classical guitars, a pair of needle nose pliers maybe, Windex to clean it off with, olive oil to oil the fretboard, which is raw wood, and a set of new strings, and a cloth to clean it with. Of course I have the oil. So when you do this, I always hit the string when I start tuning to make sure that the string is actually going in the loose direction, meaning going down and loosening, because if somebody puts the strings on backwards, what you think will be loosening the strings will actually be tightening them. So it's fun to listen to, and it's also much safer to do it this way. So it's nice to have the needle nose pliers to help pull these strings out. Open the little holes. And then they're all tied on this end. Yank them out. Tying them on this side is one of the most important and trickiest parts of putting on classical guitar strings. So, if you have an old vintage guitar, you might want to consider using something else besides Windex for cleaning it. But this is not an old vintage guitar. It's got a tough lacquer finish. Windex works great. If you had a handmade guitar that had a varnish on it or whatever, Windex would not be a good idea. So I'm cleaning off the fretboard because finger oil and dirt gets on there, and the only time you can clean it obviously is when the strings are off. Then, oiling the fretboard every time you change your strings is a really good idea. Fretboards are raw wood, there's no finish on them, and they will dry out over time. This guitar is 20 years old. I've known of students who've had handmade guitars and they've taken them to school at places like Eastman, and the fretboard have cracked. And it's probably because nobody ever oiled the fretboard. Olive oil is a great oil for oiling fretboards. Look all nice and shiny and new. And that's all you gotta do. So, when you start tying the strings on, the bridge end, you start with the first string, the E string, the little one. You stick it through the hole and wrap it over and underneath towards yourself, the person stringing it, and then loop it over and braid it, tie it through, always going towards yourself, the person stringing the guitar. The two thinnest strings, the E string and the B string, you want to tie through twice, because they tend to want to slip out because they're so slick and small. Then I'm going to leave a little pigtail end of the string going past the next hole. This is the tricky part, because each string is going to crimp down the other string to help hold them in place. So when I put the second string through, the B string, I lift up that little pigtail from the first string to make sure that this string goes underneath it. And I do the same thing, over and under towards myself. This is the second string. tie it twice. And leave the end going past the third hole for the G string. And I'm using these special D'Addario or D'Addarios composite strings, so my third string has a strange brown color to it. These are my favorite classical guitar strings by far. So the third string, all you have to do is tie it through once, because it's so thick and hard it's not going to slip. And I leave the pigtail going past the next hole, and I'm going to crimp it down with the D string, which is a wrapped metal string. So it's never going to slip. So I'm braiding these all together underneath each time. And when they make these wound strings, sometimes I think it's when the machine that's winding the metal around the fibers is slowing down or speeding up, the winds get separated. Cut that off. If there's any of that string on there, just cut it off. It's a weak link and we don't want it on the guitar if we can avoid it. Usually on the E string you see it. And here's the E string, and yes indeed, there is place where this is weak string. We don't want any weak string on the guitar. So I'm just going to take my clippers and just cut it off. So the last E string, I'm going to put it over away from myself, so that it goes out the opposite direction and goes towards the A string, just so I can neatly tuck it underneath the A string. And this is not necessary for strength or anything, it just looks better. So, they're all tied one underneath the other on the back. These two strings you tie twice because they're going to pull out if you don't. Even with the crimping, they still have a tendency to want to get pulled out. So, we started from the first string and went to the sixth. Now we're going to go from the sixth string and go to the first. And we wrap them on this side. And all I'm going to do is put this into the hole once. Leave a little bit, like 1/4 of an inch sticking out the other side. And you just take your string winder and you wind on all of the string. That's why we can cut off that little piece of bad string, because there is tons of extra string, especially for the E string, that's the closest one to the nut. And now, both E strings I'm going to wrap towards the outside so that they come straight off of the nut. All of the rest of the strings I'm going to wind them towards the inside so that they're going more straight off of their slot in this nut. So all I do is stick the string in the hole once. You don't need to tie these strings on. There's going to be so many wraps around this post that it will never slip. Now the B string, just as in on that side, the saddle bridge side, I tied the string on because it's so thin it might slip out. So this is the first string I'm doing on this side now, that I'm going to actually tie it through the hole twice. Tying it literally just means threading it through the hole more than once. And then you start a winding. first string. And I'm tying that one through twice because the first two strings, the thinnest strings, are likely to slip on you. And I'm going to wrap this one now towards the outside. We want those strings coming straight off of the slot in the nut. And I'm going to try and slide these winds over a little bit to make sure I've got room to wind all the string on. So this G string loop looks a little loose, so I'm just going to yank on the string over here a little bit. Make sure these loops are nice and tight. And there you have it. All looped together there, or all tied together there, and then these two E's round to the outside, the rest of the strings wound towards the inside so that they're coming straight off the nut as possible. This keeps it from wearing out the nut. If this string goes way over here, it has a big angle. As you tune it and tighten it, it literally destroys the slot. It gets caught in the slot in the nut. That's why you hear that king, king when you tune up. And it also wears out the nut. It's also a good idea to put the tension on the new strings gradually. Do not tune them straight up to full pitch. That's bad for the guitar because you've taken all the tension off of it, and it's bad for the strings. A good guitar shouldn't have any problem withstanding it, but the strings, it's not good for them. Good to break in the strings gradually. So you can hear these nylon strings, the B and the E string, just going out of tune as fast as I can tune them up. So the more you tune these things in the first few days, the faster they break in. Getting a little pull tug like this is also a good idea. Now I'll take the tuning fork and see how close we are. Getting there. And voila, there you have it. It's not in pitch yet, but I'm going to bring them up gradually.